Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad. Today we're doing a BlockVera Crypto Cafe chat, and we're doing that with Dave, and he's also well known as the Crypto Godfather. Dave, thanks so much, mate, for coming on to this podcast, for the BlockVera podcast. It's the very first one, actually, where we get down and dirty and understand a little bit more about what you're doing, mate.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for having me. It's good to be on.
No worries. Now, for those who want to know a bit more about Dave, he's also the CEO of Block Magazine, which is a very prominent magazine in the crypto and blockchain space. You're the CEO, mate, so that's pretty cool. You're leading the way. How's that going? What have you been doing since you started in this space?
Sure. I'll tell you a little bit about the magazine. So we came out with the magazine under our consultancy about a little over 7 months ago. We launched the first issue in November. So just to give everyone a quick brief, the first issue we came out with a local coin ATM. That was our featured cover, and then soon after that we started covering more aspects of the industry, ranging from exchanges to figures to people of controversy. We've interviewed people like John McAfee. We've had OKX, the exchange, on. Also, we've talked to Justin Sun, which was in February, and then more recently we had Craig Wright, the creator of Bitcoin SV. And
the controversial Aussie mate.
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting interviews. And soon after that, the drama with him and everybody online started happening. So,
well, mate, can we talk about that? Obviously, because this is a BlockVera crypto casual chat in this instance. So let's just go with the whole overlap of conversation. With Craig, I wanted to ask you, what was the sentiment when Peter started to react to some of the reactions or the actions that Craig took when he wanted to sue everyone? What did you think about that, especially when it was trying to affect some of the actual projects themselves, like, for example, what was it, Satoshi Vision initiative that he sort of promotes? Obviously, some of these individuals wanted to quash his project. What did you think about that? Did you think that went past the professional line, or were you supportive of that?
Okay, well, this was obviously with the Craig Wright drama and controversy. This was probably one of the biggest events in the news more recently. So let me turn back the time by about a month.
Okay.
So I had an interview with Craig, and I spoke to Craig. We did his magazine cover, and soon after releasing the cover on the cover issue with Craig, which was March's issue of Block Magazine, we came out with it. And funny thing was, I actually believed that Block Magazine may have had a little bit of contribution to what happened with Binance and CZ.
Really? Okay, maybe. Tell us more. What happened?
So we finished the interview with Craig. By the way, Craig is just my opinion. Craig is a very, very smart guy. He's very, very technical. He's smart in the sense of the development side of cryptocurrencies. I don't want to comment on whether I think he's Satoshi or not.
I actually really respect what you're saying, because I also don't want to comment on whether or not he's Satoshi. It's not because I don't want to have the balls to state that. It's just that I don't think it's really that important, because often there's been proof that there's a group of people involved in that initial sort of Satoshi vision. But what is interesting in what you're saying, Dave, is that I also had communications with Craig years ago, when he was really purporting to be a main figure in crypto. He's also super controversial, so even back then he was on Twitter, he was doing a lot of stuff, and he always did seem to have a lot of technical knowledge, and that can't be taken away from him regardless of all the controversy. So I do tend to agree with you that he does have a position in the space. But I can also tell you, mate, as an Aussie, he doesn't come across as your typical Aussie. He is super arrogant, and he is super full of himself at different times. There's just no question. So it's interesting you're saying that you had a good conversation with him. So how did that play out when you did catch up?
Oh, most definitely. I agree with what you're saying about his arrogance, his intelligence, because to be honest, him and along with John McAfee were the two funnest interviews I've done. They were the most interesting ones. There were a lot of what we get with a lot of feature interviews, and also a lot of people we talk to for Block Magazine. It's a lot of cookie cutter answers, and for marketing purposes or for
totally understand.
But
Yeah, they cut through all
Yeah.
the bullshit, don't they? They get straight to it, and there's no fluff. It's very candid, and I really like that too. It's a bit like this conversation now. There's just, you remove all the bullshit and you just have a conversation that's real. So did you find that they did that? Or especially in Craig's situation, what was the value when you unwrapped everything, especially given that you've got the interview skills? Did you get any, juicy stuff out of Craig? Because he would have given
Oh,
whatever.
yeah, most definitely. I think with Craig, he's very direct forward, and the way he sees Bitcoin is really or cryptocurrency in general is really the opposite of how John McAfee sees it. John McAfee goes down the direction of completely a vision of a decentralized world where the governments are taking down things like that. Whereas Craig sees Bitcoin more of I would summarize it as he sees it as quite a commercial application where it can increase efficiency, cut down costs and transaction speeds of basically all businesses worldwide.
Right.
But anyways, back to what happened with the whole thing. Right after we released the the interview with Craig Wright, CZ actually commented on my Twitter because previously we've been talking to CZ about possibly getting him for an interview with Block Magazine. So we were scheduling a time, and then CZ jokingly, so CZ jokingly writes on our comments on our Twitter with Craig Wright. He says, "Oh, something along the lines of looks like I can't be on the cover anymore. Damn."
Oh, I saw that actually, and I was wondering what that was about. And that makes a lot of sense because it was more like tongue in cheek, I think, because he's so anti-Craig. I don't know if he was actually.
Yeah. It was most definitely a joke. I've been talking to CZ for a while. It was most definitely a joke, but then it created quite a bit of drama where Craig started replying on our company Twitter and my Twitter. He started replying to CZ, insulting him, and it started a little bit of a back and forth. And then soon after, I think it was 2 to 3 weeks after, is when all this drama online, especially with Calvin Air, the partner of
yes,
Craig Wright, right?
I saw that with the graphic, images of young women around the poolside, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it was him, Calvin Air, and Craig Wright. They started getting some flack online over all this, the photos, and then they started suing people, right? So then CZ, soon after CZ was the first to delist Bitcoin SV, and then all the other exchanges like Kraken, they started following. So
I wanted to ask you though, in that sort of process, there was also Peter McCormick's drama that he had, because Craig then, he reacted very with great vitriol, with great zeal, and also in a very litigious manner, because he then threatened publicly to sue him, and also initiated letters to him, which then Peter quite comically responded with a post on Twitter, and he really made that global. So it was quite a controversial move in that sense on the crypto chessboard, really throwing back, a very direct move. And the whole community supported him, it seemed like, because it was really flying in the face of many of the things that we stood by, which was the right to be autonomous, to have your voice. When people are going to be so vehemently litigious, it makes people question, I think, the whole move towards blockchain decentralization distribution, because, they want to protect their interests, and obviously Craig's got proprietary tech to protect. But do you think sometimes he just goes too far, like wanting to sue everyone?
Well, let's put it this way. The way I just touched a little bit about how Craig Wright and Bitcoin SV and Calvin Air, they're quite I touched a little bit about how they're very commercialized and corporate rather than decentralized. Whereas the online community, people who support Bitcoin, or people who are very enthusiastic about it, they tend to be not so corporate, more aiming for decentralized vision. Or that's one side, and the other side is people just try to make some money in this space.
Right.
With Peter McCormick, I don't know too much about him, but I've seen his name pop up here and there. But what happened with Craig Wright is, I think my opinion on him being litigious and suing people is really, I don't think that there was any commercial or profit to be gained from suing people. He was really just trying to make a statement by trying to create some fear about people talking about it. And Peter McCormick responded in a very similar way, basically trying to call the bluff of Calvin Air and
yes.
Craig Wright, and he's really just sending something back, basically saying, "Look, I'm not scared. I'm doing the same thing back to you."
Right. So do you think because of that perhaps that backfired in their faces? Because Pete had the gumption to respond and the audacity, and the temerity to really just bring it forth and respond with the same sort of, tennis ball approach where he's literally acing him. Do you think that in that respect it really damaged their credibility in any way, especially with the effects it had clearly on the market value of the SV, the token itself?
Oh, most definitely. Regardless of any opinion on the creators of Bitcoin SV, on them as people, strategically angering the market that way was definitely not in their favor. Let's just look at, especially when Bitcoin SV was delisted from Binance. Binance is one of the highest volume exchanges in the world, and looks like the next 2-3 years will be this similar situation. And Binance has a lot of influence on the market too. Look at
Right.
Kraken and these other exchanges starting to delist. It's certainly not good. It cuts out a lot of the trading volume. Just from a business perspective, it's bad to have less volume, especially from an exchange, losing an exchange as big as Binance.
Exactly. So obviously,
very bad.
And that's what I wanted to talk to you about as well in terms of professional conduct, because it's one thing for this kind of public fight to ensue, but it's another thing for professional colleagues in the crypto space to then react, especially someone like CZ who has all the clout. He has, a multi-billion-dollar business, and he can actually go out and delist someone like Craig if he goes too far. Now the question is that the right thing? There was a lot of discussion in Twitter about that, whether that was professionally a reasonable move, given that perhaps there was this issue between this challenge between a subjective response and an objective one. And is it reasonable that that be conflated when CZ clearly has a vested interest in what he's doing? I'm not suggesting he shouldn't have done that or should have, but I think it's fair to ask that question, raise the debate that should we in fact be separating our professional position as opposed to our personal one when it comes to someone like Craig?
I think it's interesting that you bring up this discussion or debate about whether on the CZ side he was right to be delisting BSV, because right after that happened, I actually made a post on Twitter because I was curious too, and I was discussing this with many of the colleagues here in China, many of the people in the crypto space, and trying to hear the opinions on who thought CZ was correct, who thought he was wrong.
Right.
I think that I can actually see both sides of it. So first of all, standing on Craig Wright's side, I think it's pretty harsh to delist someone because of opinion, and I'll explain why, whether he's Satoshi or not. But on the other hand, hey, it's CZ's company. It's a private company. He can make the decision he wants. And also, arguably what Craig Wright was doing for the space was very aggressive. So I can see why CZ delisted Craig Wright too.
Right.
Let me touch a little bit about what I meant by where Craig Wright I still give him the benefit of the doubt. I personally think it's unlikely that he's Satoshi, maybe even very unlikely, but I've had a discussion with people, some of the whales here in China. And, hey, this is the argument they use. If you were Satoshi Nakamoto himself with let's say 900,000 Bitcoin or however much he has, would you want to prove once and for all that you're the person holding that much Bitcoin? I mean, I certainly wouldn't. Right. If it's a lot of money, and also it's quite unsafe. With stealing Bitcoin once you've attached the Bitcoin to an identity is not that difficult. Right. You can apply force to people. You can threaten people physically. It's probably unsafe for his family too. I'm saying if you were Satoshi. So I really don't see a need for him to be proving himself to be Satoshi, even if he were. Right. But just from the way he's acting, I doubt it. But I'm not one to say. But back to CZ, I think CZ has his own right to do what he wants with his exchange. He didn't like what he was seeing in the market. He thought it was too aggressive how he was treating people, and I don't think it was professional how Bitcoin SV and the whole Craig Wright suing people. I don't think that was the right thing to do.
I think you raise a really fair point, because what you're alluding to is that perhaps CZ tolerated a lot of this kind of conduct predating that one catalyst. I really do think that it was more of a catalyst, that incident, and you were part of that actually, the way you explain what happened, what ensued with your interview. And I think in that respect, really, CZ had enough. He literally just cracked through Twitter, and he reacted vehemently and then delisted him. But it does hark back to the narrative, and that's what I want to get back to. Let's move more generally away from both of them for a moment. When we stand up and we say we want to be more about a new form of business, a new mode of innovative technology that sort of allows for all of us to cut out middlemen, to have more autonomy, to have a greater voice, it almost flies in the face of this kind of approach. In Australia, for example, if you go to a pub, you know, and you can, the rights of the owners of the publican is such that you can be kicked out at any given point because it's private grounds. And so if you behave badly, you get kicked out. And a lot of people find that even contentious because it's an analogy to liken CZ's reaction, because once again, it's like he has his own crypto pub, but a very, very famous one known as Binance, where he, you know, runs that essentially how he wants to. The question is, though, at what point do these big exchanges be accountable for the public domain? Because obviously we're all engaged in that same philosophy, arguably, to try and change the game a bit, to move on from old models, to move away from old school styles of business and interaction and transactions to new ones where things are more open and transparent. So are we perhaps digressing? Are we reverting back to the things we're trying to move away from when we see these kinds of subjectivities come into play? Because that's a form of control when things upset them.
I see what you're saying, and to answer, I think especially with the crypto space, everything moves so quickly. Within the span of 2 years, we've seen new exchanges pop up. We've seen many new exchanges. We've seen new cryptocurrency projects, and also we've seen new styles of funding. We started off with just Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then we've moved very quickly to ICOs. And over a year's time, over 1 year, 2017 and 2018, ICOs have almost died off. Now, right. And then there were talks of STOs, which didn't really catch on. We're still working on that regulatorily wise. And then
a few years away from that, probably.
Yeah, and then currently in the space, what's hot now is the IEOs. But IEOs is really something that may not last very long. So what I'm trying to say is, with all these new technologies, new ideas coming up in the space, we're really trying to find a grasp of what works. And with the current environment, there's no questioning that the exchanges are a big part of the ecosystem. And why is that? Because I understand the whole vision of being decentralized, where not one company or organization makes all these big decisions for the market. Right. But on the other hand, you also the weakness with decentralization is you don't have that control. Because when it comes down to it, Bitcoin so far to me is really the only successful, truly decentralized currency, and also the only entity in the crypto world that's truly decentralized. We look at Binance. Hey, you still at the end of the day, at least for now, you still need a team of smart people hired. Smart people need to eat. They need salaries. They need HR. They need benefits. They need accountants. And this is what a company can provide, right? With a decentralized nature, it's pretty hard to get a decentralized exchange set up. And right now, Binance is doing that too. But is it truly decentralized? I don't know.
Right. And I think the way in which we saw even their own exchange with their DEX play out, we know that it's not necessarily, that fundamental DEX that was by definition decentralized. But I mean, even CZ made the point that really they're trying to be a business. They're trying to establish themselves and assert themselves as a leading exchange in the space. And I think even with the projects we see on board too, Dave, right now, many of them would openly argue that they themselves are not decentralized by definition, but they're actually trying to utilize decentralized technology, embed them into their projects so that they can optimize their performance and more importantly, enable people like us as participants to have a more have a greater stake, have a greater voice, and also have real autonomy and real access to the point of that project. And that also relates to the enterprise itself. So you're cutting out a lot of that interim middleman cost. So essentially there should be more benefit to the parties that are interacting in that exchange and that transaction. So, harping back to CZ, I think really he's trying to change the game itself and leading the way in volume, leading the way in liquidity. There has to be someone at the top, just like we've seen, historically with every iteration of business or every new wave of technology. There's always going to be leaders, whether that be Google, whether that be Facebook, or whether that be CZ's work with Binance. I'm not suggesting that for any moment that monopolies are good, but I also don't see that he's running a monopolistic position, because there are other exchanges coming forth. We're seeing the likes of Huobi or a BitMax coming forth now, and there's always controversies with each of them, but certainly without access for the people to go and interact in this environment, then what do we actually have? Without Binance, like you're alluding to, I don't know if crypto would actually survive right now in 2019. So clearly his role is significant, and I think CZ knows that. The big question is about accountability. Do we feel, as people in this space, especially in your role as CEO of Block Magazine, that things are transparent, that the leadership they're being accountable, that they're actually actors that are being responsible and doing things in accordance with the vision of the majority, and they are essentially those retail investors? Because that's the big question as well, Dave. We see this hierarchy of access and a lot of blockchain bullshit and crypto crap that happens. So fundamentally, are we in a fair system whereby these guys are leading the way and leading the charge for greater transparency and truth and trust?
I think with regards to that question, first, it's important to look back at the source of the source and the origin of where all these companies come from and all these people. I mean, just a quick brief history. I don't know if you're aware, but all the exchange heads of today, the biggest exchanges, a significant amount of them came from the first Bitcoin exchange in China, OKCoin,
right.
CZ included. He was an employee there, right? So the heads of the founders of Huobi, OKX, Binance, Coinbase, any exchange you can name, they most likely came out of OKCoin.
Okay.
So after that, they all started their own exchanges, and what happened is Binance pretty much came out on top. I think what CZ is doing that's great is that he seems as transparent as it gets when it comes to addressing the issues, addressing the market, and regardless of all that, he's got a trustable image, and I think that's attributed to the success of Binance in the last 2 years. Also, they grew so quickly mostly because they were the first exchange to truly address tackling this. How do we trade altcoins? Before that, it was mostly OTC or cash to Bitcoin. He was the first to address altcoins, so that attributed also to why they grew so quickly. Right. After that, in terms of your question about transparency and all this, I think in my opinion, Binance is leading the way, and what we see from our consultancy and also in just talking to people in the space through the magazine, the Binance is leading the way, but everyone in the space currently is pretty much following the trend of following the footsteps of Binance. Binance comes out with a launch pad, other exchanges come out with their own IEO platform.
So true.
And they're all following their footsteps. Usually it tends to be 1 or 2 months after Binance comes out. And the thing is, at some point, I won't name any of the exchanges because many of them are my clients and friends. But
right,
a lot of the names are very similar to Launchpad, right? Like CZ comes out with Launchpad, and then one exchange comes out with, I don't know, Rocket Pad.
We had the Launchpad, then we have Spotlight, then we have, I can't remember all, but they all have those metaphors of launching. And I think that's the point to make. Is that fundamentally what's important is that we understand the inner workings of the IEO, what their premise is and what their purpose is. And really it was to change the game. That seems to be what they were trying to do, change the narrative to enliven, vivify the whole space because of the decline of the ICO at the time. It was a dying sort of approach. It was a dying architecture because it had done its thing for some time and created some hype. But one of the things that seemed to happen is that it was really screwing over the retail investor fundamentally because they were the last to access the benefits of the blockchain or, utilize access deals essentially. And this is what I want to ask you about. Given your role as CEO, you've seen everything under the sun when it's come to all the different facets, whether that be from exchange to VCs or whether that be from just investment fundamentally, regardless of what position a person's in. But it's always been about how early a person can get in. And in that respect, do you feel like it hasn't always been a fair system? Whether that be, and also in that respect, have these projects essentially been about transparently for the purpose of their design, or has it more so been about just raising capital to make money?
To answer your question, I think the state of the market now, 90% or more, the majority of projects out there, at least from the exchange side or any or view outside of the project, is really to make money. And your point on touching on, it's a matter of who's earliest is completely right. The IEO, I mean, I don't know if people see it, but I think I see it quite clearly. At least my opinion is an IEO is really the same as an ICO.
Exactly.
It's really just it's an IEO. It's an ICO that's done on an exchange where you trust the exchange has done their due diligence, where it gives you the benefits of an IEO are two things, right? One is, that at least someone from the exchange, hopefully you're trusting that somebody has taken a look at the project and it's not a complete scam. It's not, you're not going to get
people, yeah. But do you think that people even care? I've been having these discussions with a lot of different technologists in this space, and what we're finding is that the common denominator is speculation. So as long as the narrative is upheld of a 3x to a 10x in the IEO space because of the release on exchange in those secondary markets, many of them don't seem to care, because as long as the majority believe in that approach, the effect, the indirect and direct effect is a significant price hike.
Yeah, exactly. That's the second thing I was going to say. The first thing is that you get a slightly more trust, but that there's a pretty much no chance you'll get completely exited. But I think the most important part, the benefit of it, is the speculation, right? My guess, if I were to gander a guess, would be that most people who get into or buy an IEO have never really looked at the project or really cared about the project. It's really just almost a guarantee that it's going to go up,
exactly.
At least for now.
Yeah, and what about the poor retail investors who can't get that access? Obviously, the privileges are associated with, the reputation or the power or the clout they have. So influencers, for example, or content creators, often they can get access to those things. Myself included, as an Australian, I can invest sometimes in those private sales, and that's not something I'm ever going to shy away from stating, but doesn't necessarily make it right, because like in any traditional business sector, whether that be Wall Street or beyond that, there's always going to be that hierarchy. But again, weren't we supposed to try and change that so that we had almost a Nash-like approach where they had a more open slather approach where everyone had a maximum they could invest in, and it was very, very transparent in that sense right from the go-get when it came to those initial rounds. But there's also the flip side where you see some companies that have multiple rounds from the seed all the way through in terms of price. And so, friends and family first, that approach. And that becomes an issue arguably too, because then once again, the most expensive point of investment is always that retail investment at the public sale or beyond that on the exchange. So how do we get around that, Dave? How do we move away from traditional models of access and whereby it's already inferred that those of privilege get in first?
I think the point you're trying to make is really it touches on what we were speaking about Binance and how they're the first to do things. So when the first Binance was arguably the first to do a successful IEO on their launchpad, I think it was the BTT BitTorrent token first.
Right.
What happened with that was it touches on the point of maybe friends and family got it first, institutional investors or close people got it first, which is in a sense non-ethical because, like you said, retail investors really get screwed in that sense.
Right.
But soon after that, Binance comes out with a lottery system. I would assume and hope that it's fair.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way that they've sort of made a modification to try to make the system more equal. And what we've seen with other exchanges is they've also followed suit. Some of the other larger exchanges doing IEOs are starting to do a lottery system where they're doing different rounds, round 1 to 3 of IEO. But for still the current state of the market for retail investors is still very tough. even like you said, with people like yourself or me with possible connections to try to get better chance of getting an IEO, it's still tough sometimes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it really is, and often,
Mhm.
once again, it's all about accreditation as well. If you're not an accredited investor now, it's getting harder in that respect. But you know, even when it comes to the projects themselves, I wanted to ask about this. This is a really controversial question, but what makes an exchange decide to list something? Often I've wondered or pondered whether or not there was more of these subjective personal relationships between the exchange and a startup, or it might even be an incubator, or it might even be a VC. Because as you know, sometimes the VC has a multitude of different projects that they're housing and representing. And if there's a strong relationship, they might have gone to a few conferences, they like each other, let's just speculate for a moment, and then they decide to help each other. You know, is that healthy for the system? And what's the vetting process? Is it purely objective, what determines a listing? Because we hear that time and time again, but do we really believe it?
I think to answer your question, it's the market now is a lot more. I think it's a lot more objective than it was before. Before, it might have been a lot more to do with connections or how much money a project was willing to pay. But in today's day and age, I do believe that exchanges are moving more towards a more ethical approach where they look at different various aspects. We help a lot of clients list on exchanges, and we've noticed a trend where different exchanges will look at different things. They'll do a technical audit of the project. They'll look into do some due diligence on the founders. They're going to be looking at the presentation of the whole company, including the website, white paper, things like that. And then some will be digging into the community. How do they have a supporting base? Do people talk about it? Do people know about it? All these things come into play. Of course, there's still I'm sure there's a certain level of whether, let's say, an exchange head knows the VC that supported this project. Maybe they're good buddies, but that's something that really can't be changed, right? This is not only in the crypto space. In all business, there's a certain level of what we call in Chinese 关系, or relationships, where it still does matter to how you do business. And I'm not going to be the one to be blaming exchanges for taking personal relationships into account for listing a project, right?
Right.
I'm sure it's still a little bit a part of it, but I do think the general trend, it is heading towards the direction where the projects do have to be quite legitimate to list. It's no longer the days of any project can list if you can pay.
I totally agree. And what's interesting too, having talked to so many CEOs, and you have as well as a CEO yourself, Dave, is that the narrative now coming from them is very clearly that there's a lot more rigor involved in the listing process itself. And then we see the likes of things like Binance Labs or establishments or processes whereby there's a lot of due diligence and a lot of research being done to verify and check the veracity and quality of the projects that aim to list in exchanges, because obviously there's such immense monetary value and monetary gain through the potential of listing. But then it moves across to the monetary sort of aspect of influence itself and of media. I really want to talk to you about that before we finish today, because often once something lists, there's the suggestion now that only things like market making and media continue to drive that price, when we still hear the narrative of crypto economics not really being a true empirically proven marker of value. We hear it, we see it written in the theory, but there's no proof yet that token can correlate with the growth of that project or that tokenized economy. So the reliance on the market making and that media seems to be so strong after we see that influx and that price growth from the IEO. So what are your thoughts on that continued reliance on artificial means to inflate price?
I think, I mean, I've seen the all sides of this space from the project point of view, the exchange point of view, also with the market making, and obviously with the media side, which we work a lot with. It's not good for the market long term, and I don't think it's a way that's going to last. Greed unfortunately drives a lot of what's going on in the market right now. We look for most investors, the majority of them are looking for projects to invest in that have the 3x, 10x, or maybe even 50% growth nowadays.
Right.
What the problem with that is, it's exactly like you said. A lot of projects right now rely on market making and then media. But the problem with those two things is market making. It's not a sustainable way.
Mhm.
It's not going to last forever. With media, I think media is more important in the sense that projects do have to let customers know what they're doing. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, in today's market, this started back in 2017. I started seeing the trend towards the end of the bull run, where news and announcements and great news doesn't necessarily help the price anymore. So
Mhm.
what I think we need to do in the market is we need to wait it out, where a lot of these projects that are really not, who knows what they're doing, a lot of these projects that are subpar really get weeded out of the market first, and
Right.
then hopefully the projects that do remain, they in a sense, in a speculatory sense, I do think that they will come back. But
Yeah,
I
I
do think
totally,
95% of them will be gone.
I totally
Um,
agree with you. I think a lot of the projects themselves are built on bullshit. And I wanted to talk to you as well about the quality of reporting, of information, of education in this space, because many of the speakers from the influencer side or the content creator side have come in arguably for pursuit of money, and that being their core tenant. So in that respect, as they come running to the crypto stage, many of them are really thinking of themselves, in that very ultra capitalistic, very avaricious and greedy premise. So is that part of the problem when we see them aligned with other parties in that space of influence and effect? Because right now in 2019, we're seeing potentially collaborations that can damage crypto itself, because they're starting to realize the power of collective shilling, the power of working together to try and inflate prices, to benefit themselves. And I was wondering, as someone who's in the public eye and being a CEO and really watching crypto closely, are you seeing some of these parties get smarter about the way in which they capitalize?
I coming from the speaking on the influencer side, these people shilling projects. You
Mm,
talked about that. I don't. I can't. You can't really blame. You can't really blame somebody for trying to being a capitalist and trying to make some money off certain things. I mean, people need to eat, but I think there's a certain responsibility of doing some research, and I'm afraid I'm afraid that due diligence from the individual side is very tough. A lot of them aren't. A lot of influencers or these people in the community aren't necessarily smart people.
right.
They're not necessarily educated. They're not necessarily experts. It's tough to be an expert in crypto, but a lot of these people certainly aren't,
Hmm.
which is a tough. So it's tough, but you can't blame people for trying to make money in this space too. It's a space that's very very focused on
Sure,
money.
but
But I think
out of respect, though, for those that do endeavour to try and understand and educate themselves, don't you think that it is beholden on them? Don't you think the onus of responsibility, if they're going to step into the public domain in this respect, is to endeavour to learn more about what they're speaking of? Because, as you said, many of them don't. And it's not that I wouldn't say that they're not intelligent, but if they're not really trying to understand the subject matter and really expand their own repertoire of knowledge, then what the hell are they doing? Why are they speaking, and why are they being taken seriously as speakers and representatives?
most definitely, that's one of the big problems in this space. But like the subpar projects, I think these people will be weeded out. It's already downtrending towards um, these influencers or people shilling projects. This is
Hmm.
not 2017. If you
Right.
had a good amount of followers in 2017, you could probably shill projects, get paid a pretty good amount of money, and be making a comfortable living off that. But
Mm.
now is no longer the days of that. So people who are really building projects, are actually operating real businesses or have something real to say where people want to hear.
Right.
Those are people that are going to be able to survive. I can tell you that most of the influencers now in this space most likely aren't making enough money to even be doing it full time.
Absolutely. And, I was actually speaking with a colleague last night who has a full-time job, and she's actually having to step back from crypto. And she's a highly credible speaker in crypto who does a lot of due diligence and research. And once again, the irony is that a lot of those who do that endeavor, they're not sexy in terms of, the narrative that they put forth or the information, because, as you said before, it's not necessarily the technology or the education that comes up trumps when it comes to salability and spreading the word. It's actually just short, sharp information about price, about the potential for that, to be an investment, because speculators really just want short, sharp proof of value. And so we see more so that the influencers that clap and dance to that tune do very well. So I want to ask you some really challenging questions with regard to that. What are your thoughts on the following names? When I say Balina, what comes to mind?
Ian Balina, I've never actually contacted with Ian Balina. I've never met him. I think I've looked a little bit into his past. I don't think he's too technical about the space, but he was lucky to build a following. And I don't think that his personal business will be doing too well in the future, considering that the days of shilling are over.
Okay, that's a really honest response. What about Suppoman?
Suppoman, him, I think he's more of a fun. I think he's more, to me, just from what I see, he seems like a fun character that he's peddling to the masses of maybe the lower level crypto following. But I don't see him doing too much wrong anymore. He's really just seems to be covering projects. I don't really follow these two guys too much.
Gotcha.
I think before you ask for other people, I think my main the thing I want to say to anybody who's listening to this or to people who follow Twitter is remember that these influencers or Twitter is such a small space compared to the larger things that are going on in the space. A lot of what you see on Twitter doesn't really matter to the crypto space. It's really just it's really quite a small community that's interacting with each other. We really have to look outside that bubble to see what's really going on. There's a lot of big players that don't even have Twitter accounts.
Absolutely. And even when it comes to just East versus West, Twitter is not really that predominant or well known in the Eastern, sphere, because they have other technologies, they have other platforms. So Dave, obviously there's individual parties, and you've made it clear that you don't necessarily want to go on and talk about those individuals, and I respect that. But mate, let's talk about prices for a second. Now, if you dig deep, and I'd imagine you know this, is the going rate for a top influencer or a top shiller is 20 grand plus for a video. Now, what do you say to that, mate? When shitty projects are literally paying that kind of money to get these projects out there?
It's hard to comment on that from one point of view, because on the one hand, in the cryptocurrency space, if you have with any marketing, actually, if you have a figure that has a large following that makes a product, it's hard to blame them for taking money to do this. But on the exchange side, I mean, not exchange, on the project side, if they whether they're bad projects or good projects, I think in the long term it's not going to work out anyways, because right now the reaction and engagement rate to crypto, if I were to pay a top influencer to put out a video for a project, it's not necessarily going to reflect in terms of my own project's price increase anymore. Okay. So I think eventually this trend, which I don't think is a good one, will die out, because you can't expect these projects to keep shelling out $20,000, $50,000.
Exactly. So do you think that there's,
when it's not reflecting their price?
Right. And so do you think that there's a role though for any kind of public speaker? Because obviously you're in the public eye, you're the CEO of the magazine itself. So you are a proponent of education, you're a proponent of information. So is there going to be a role to play still for those who want to put out content?
Oh, most definitely. Like with any industry, there's, let's say in beauty, there's makeup influencers. In sports, there's people who they're in gaming. There's people like PewDiePie on YouTube. They're going to be these types of people will take money for advertisements. For me, and personally, I get projects contacting myself for speaking about projects or being an ambassador, things like that. I turn down most of them, even no matter amount of money, mostly because I just don't trust the project, or I don't feel like I don't want to tarnish my own image, because if the project's not something I want to align with. Right. Unfortunately, most influencers, the smaller ones or the ones around Twitter, a lot of them might not do this, but I think eventually this will weed itself out. And as long as
as long as the projects are solid to me, I'm happy to work with them. But for a lot of the other guys, I do worry that it is a big issue. I do
Right.
hope that this problem eventually naturally disappears on its own.
Well, let's talk about the bigger media companies now, for example. Now, you are one of them with Block Magazine. Then we see the likes of The Block with Mike Dudas. He's actually come out and made it clear that at the beginning, Coinbase was involved in some of the financial support of the Block enterprise. And then we see the likes of Crypto Briefing. And then if you look further into Breaker Mag, whatever the platform is, there seems to be some sort of financial support from somewhere that connotes to some sort of subjective support. So what about you? How do you make sure that your platform is objective and can provide us with key information and not be skewed by your own interests, whether that be your investments, whether you be paid as an ambassador? I mean, it's a really tough thing to do in crypto because everything is so monetized.
Most definitely. With that, so with regards to Block Magazine, we haven't taken any outside investment as of yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen the Block. They work with Coinbase, all these Cointelegraph, all these other ones. Sure, they have a certain backing, or they might have conflicts of interest elsewhere. But
Right.
For Block Magazine, our main point, first of all, we don't release news on a daily basis. Ours is a monthly magazine that covers various aspects of the space. We try to get the most. Our main content focuses on entertainment and education of the space in a way where the average person would be able to read and understand. We found that with too much media in crypto, it's too complicated for the average person to read. And what we're targeting is not the people in crypto. Let's say the 50 to 100 million people in the entire world that own crypto. We're trying to target people who might be interested but don't know too much about it. They're trying to find out more about it, but they don't want to read an entire white paper to find out.
That's awesome because you're expanding the community itself.
Yeah, exactly. And also another thing that others might not have that we can do is we have great connections, and we're all quite industry veterans in the space, and we can get these great interviews with these cool people that others might not be able to get. And we have candid conversations with them. We always tell them, look, we're going to have a candid conversation. Questions might be straightforward. We want to hear what's really on your mind.
Right.
And
I really like that. I really respect that approach, mate, because again, you're clearly not about the bullshit on the blockchain. You really just want to get into the guts and the crux of what these different projects and people are about. And that's all that the retail investors want. They truly want what BlockVera stands for in our platform, which is truth, trust, and transparency. So there's a lot of respect from me to you, I have to say, for what you stand for. But given that you have this magazine, I did want to ask you, do you have a subscription model? Do you have some sort of white collar access? I ask you this because I really did take it to Mike of The Block when they presented their model, because they do have a special opportunity for those who can afford, privileged access. And I made the point of saying, well, look, that's fine, you want to do that, but what about those that can't afford it? Because you're essentially selling information that's privileged because you have the access to these specialized, parties, or you can go deeper with that particular person and get more information. And I always question, why should the retail investor not be able to access that freely? So do you have some sort of system like that where, you give, much like we've seen, was it Palm Confidential? I can't remember the name, but there are parties like that Palm Beach Confidential. Yeah, they were charging immense amounts of money for privileged access as well. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you justify it if you do that?
I'll answer that in two parts. So for Block Magazine, our content is completely, we've tried actively to stray away from anything talking about speculation or price. We might get some of this information coming in every once in a while, but we definitely keep it out of the magazine. We don't have our only subscription model it's a $9.99 per month just for the magazine issue. That's it. We don't have any VIP or anything related to Palm Beach Confidential. We've strictly stayed away from any speculation.
So it's completely flat rate for everybody.
Exactly, completely. And none of the information inside is to do with speculation, really. It's really reporting on the entire industry and some cool things that are going on, and also people the market might not have access to. I think it's important from the media side to be fair and ethical, especially at this time. Look at just for example, we report on anything we think that the public will like to read about, whether it's good or bad, whether they like it or not, if it's interesting to know about. For example, we came out with we've interviewed John McAfee and Craig Wright, two people who are very, very opposite ends of the crypto spectrum. When we came out with the cover with Craig Wright, we released it, and it garnered the most attention we've ever had because a lot of people hated it. But right. I tell these people, look, responsible reporting and responsible media is reporting on all aspects of the industry, and it's really up to the reader or up to the subscriber or listener, this market to do their own due diligence and make their own decisions.
And bro, that fits in also with influencers as well in this space, because there's a lot of flack that comes forth for certain influencers who do take the route of addressing some of the crypto controversies. But their following is immensely popular because they do address the things that many people shy away from. So I will give a plug to someone like Chico Crypto, who, yes, he's controversial. Yes, he argues that he'll bring up issues that many people won't, but he's also known for that. So it's a case of each person deciding for themselves, digesting that and then deciding what that actually constitutes as truth or not. Because really it's just relaying information and the existence, as you said, of the different topics, these different people. And that's what you're doing. You're not shying away from the fact that Craig Wright exists and he has a lot to say.
Oh, most definitely. Let's just use Craig Wright as an example. Craig Wright, whether you like him or not, whether you believe what he's saying or not, whether you agree with what he's doing, he still has a significant impact on the industry. Let's just even talk about fully from a speculator's point of view, because that's what everyone wants to hear, right?
Right.
Let's talk from a speculator's point of view. If you were to not read anything that had Craig Wright listed on it, let's say we came out with Block Magazine, you see Craig Wright and you automatically hate it, you choose to ignore it, then you might not know about what's to come. If I were a speculator and I noticed something like CZ and Craig Wright were debating, I might start choosing to unload my BSV soon, right?
Right. And it also harks back even to the hashing wars we saw between, the likes of Roger Ver and Craig in that instance.
Most definitely. Exactly.
That would impact in the entire space of crypto, not just those two parties.
Exactly. So even whether you like something or not in this space, I actually think this applies to all information in anything. More information is always better, at least to me.
Absolutely.
For me to read or know about information I don't like, I follow a lot of scammers and people I don't agree with. A lot of them.
So do I.
I read every single thing because I think it makes you smarter. You have to knowing something, taking bad information or false information and being able to judge that it's false or bad is just as good to me as getting good information.
Absolutely. And on that note, it's been an absolute privilege talking to you. You are the crypto godfather in the space. You're really popular as well. I noticed on Twitter. A lot of people respect the work that you have done with your team. I really want to thank you, mate, because I hope this is the very first conversation we have, Dave. I've really enjoyed having just a really candid chat in crypto, removing all that blockchain bullshit to just get to the crux of what's going on in this contemporary space. People really appreciate what you're doing because, again, you're investing a lot of time and resources into providing this really comprehensive account each month via the Block magazine. So, yeah, once again, mate, I really applaud you for being transparent, honest, and telling us that you have that paid structure. So once again, it was, what is it, $99 a month?
Oh, it's only $9.99 USD per month.
Oh, right. Okay. So not even $10. I'm not shilling it because I haven't bought it, but I once again, I respect that you are doing something and you're really honest about the way in which you do monetize. That doesn't happen enough in crypto. And I do wish your team all the best as you continue on. And I'll be certainly following along as well. And hopefully, mate, we can catch up again and have more of these chats and break down the blockchain, get into the core of crypto so that we can really unpack more of these discussions and issues that are coming forth, especially as they relate to your monthly releases.
Thank you. I mean, that's just my manner of doing business. I think I'm more transparent and very straightforward when it comes to it. And I think the industry needs to head more towards this direction. And thank you. I appreciate this chat. And I wish you and the podcast everything for the best.
Thanks, mate. I really appreciate it. So obviously I look forward to it. And mate, you're welcome anytime on BlockVera for a crypto cafe chat, getting real on the blockchain, having candid discussions. And until that, that happens, Dave, I want to thank you once again. You're the CEO of Block Magazine. If you haven't checked it out, there'll be links, obviously provided for those in the Twitter when we release this. But until then, thanks very much for your time, mate. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you too.